story happened like 10 years ago. I grew up in a smallish house. For the majority of my childhood, I shared a bedroom with my older brother, 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the room, 2 dressers and 2 closets. We didn't even have enough room for a desk. It wasn't cramped, but it wasn't exactly comfortable either. So when my brother went away to college, I immediately moved his bed out of the room and commandeered the space, so to speak. With his permission, of course. I was finally at the age where a bedroom desk was a necessity, so it was nice not having to do homework in the basement or upstairs in my dad's office. That arrangement worked seamlessly for the 2 years before I myself went off to college, at which point I wasn't living at home anymore, so it didn't matter. After graduating, my brother got a city job in our hometown area, so we ended up moving back into my parents' house. And the first thing he does? You guessed it, re-sees our bedroom that I had spent months of expended effort redesigning. I was a little irritated at first, but my parents contextualized it by saying I had basically done the same thing to him, so it was only fair. I couldn't argue with that, so I just accepted it. By the time I graduated, I had also found a city job, so I opted to move back into my parents' house, just like my brother had. Unfortunately, I didn't have a room anymore, so I'd have to make other arrangements. The only other unused room in the house was our upstairs guest bedroom, so even though it was half the size of my old room, it would have to do the trick. The guest room was right next to my dad's office, which was the only other room on that floor. It was also directly above the garage, which meant every time someone clicked the garage door button, the whole floor would vibrate for the full 10 seconds it took the door to open. The room kind of overhangs the house slightly since it's on the corner, so there were 2 windows on intersecting walls, one overlooking the driveway and one overlooking one of the sides of the house. It wasn't ideal, but it was private and quiet most of the time. This particular incident happened on a Friday evening when I was home alone. My brother was in Baltimore for some work-related conference, and my parents were spending the night at our family shore house like they did most summer weekends. I was coming off an absolutely grueling day at work, so I decided not to go out with any of my friends or even leave the house. I just wanted to order some food and call it an early night. It was around 11:30, and I was lying in bed reading a book, trying to unwind from the day. The house was completely quiet, which was kind of nice since it's usually pretty chaotic when everyone's home. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of the garage door starting to rise, followed by that all too familiar vibrating of the floor that I'd gotten used to over the past few months. It took a few seconds for it to really hit me. None of my family members should have been home. My parents had specifically said that they were staying at the shore house until Sunday night, and my brother wasn't supposed to be back until Saturday afternoon. It took several seconds for that realization to fully sink in, but when it did, my heart started racing. I immediately jumped out of bed and looked out the window toward the driveway, but it was too dark to make out anything clearly. I could see that the garage door was open, but I couldn't tell if there was a car inside or who might have opened it. Without another thought, I rummaged through the closet until I found one of the baseball bats my parents had thrown in there for my younger days. As I was quietly walking down the stairs, I tried convincing myself that there was a logical explanation for the garage door opening. Maybe my parents had forgotten something and driven back. Maybe my brother's plans changed. Hell, maybe the door had glitched and opened on its own. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, right before turning the corner toward the main part of the house, I could hear faint voices. The voices were definitely coming from the other side of the house, where all the bedrooms were. They were too quiet for me to make out what they were saying, but I could tell that there were at least 2 people talking. That's when I knew for certain that someone had broken into our house. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address and telling the operator that my house was currently being burglarized. I left the call live and put the phone back in my pocket like they tell you to. The operator told me to stay put and not to announce my presence, but I felt this overwhelming urge to defend my house. It was like I was being compelled by some invisible force to do something rather than just hide and wait. So against the operator's instruction, I decided that's exactly what I was going to do. I crept down the hallway toward the voices, clutching the baseball bat as tightly as I could. As I got closer to my parents' bedroom, I could hear the sounds of drawers being opened and things being moved around. They were clearly searching for something valuable. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to do was probably stupid, but unable to stop myself. I started yelling as loudly as I could to catch them off guard, then charged into the room with the baseball bat raised above my head. There were two men rummaging through my mother's closet, and they both yelled out in shock when I burst through the door. I could tell they hadn't expected anyone to be home, let alone someone willing to fight back. That gave me confidence, despite the fact that I was outnumbered and they could have easily had weapons of their own. I swung the bat at the closer of the two men, connecting with his leg. He cursed and hobbled a few steps before falling over. I turned to the other one, but before I could get a clean swing at him, he dropped his shoulder and tackled me before I could react. The two of us hit the ground hard, and I immediately realized that this guy was significantly larger and stronger than me. He wrestled the bat out of my hands without much effort, then got his hands around my throat and started choking me. I was fighting for my life, clawing at his hands and trying to get him off of me, when I saw the first guy crawling towards us. He had something in his hand that looked like a knife, and in that moment, I realized I'd made a grave mistake by trying to play hero, a mistake that was going to cost me my life. I genuinely thought those might be the final moments of my life. I started accepting that I was going to die in my parents' bedroom, and all I could think about was how devastated my mom would be when she found out. But then, in the background, I heard the faint sound of police sirens approaching. The last thing I remember is the second guy picking up my baseball bat and swinging it at my head. Everything went black after that. When I woke up, someone was shaking me gently. I opened my eyes to see a police officer kneeling beside me, asking if I was okay. I was dazed and confused, and it took me several seconds to remember what had happened. I looked around the room and saw that the door connecting my parents' bedroom to the backyard was wide open. The intruders had clearly knocked me out and fled through the back when they heard the sirens. The officer told me to stay put and not to move too much in case I was concussed or had other injuries. I had a raging headache, but I was conscious and coherent, which seemed like a good sign. Once the paramedics confirmed that I was okay, I refused to go to the hospital despite their recommendations. I gave the officers a detailed account of what happened. They told me they were currently searching the neighborhood for suspects, but by the time they'd arrived, the men were already long gone. After the police finished their investigation and took some photos of the scene, I called my parents and brother to let them know what had happened. My parents yelled at me pretty harshly for being stupid enough to confront those guys, and I deserved it. Had I just done the smart thing and hid, there's a good chance the police would have been able to apprehend the perps. The men were never found, despite the police canvassing the neighborhood and following up on a few leads. My parents installed a comprehensive security system the moment they got back from the shore house, complete with cameras, motion sensors, lights, the whole nine. The days after the break-in, something kept bothering me about the whole situation. All the doors to my house were locked that night, and the only way to open the garage door was through a little button in my car that my dad had programmed to be a wireless switch. There was no way anyone would just stumble upon it. Whoever had broken in that night had known me or my family well enough to know where that button was. Up until that moment, I never locked my car when it was in the driveway either, so that's something the culprits would have had to know as well. Even more concerning was the timing. They somehow knew that my parents would be away for the weekend, that my brother was out of town. I don't live in that house anymore, but my parents were never able to determine who had broken in. It was actually something that made my dad really paranoid for a long time, since he too thought that whoever had broken in was close to the family in some way. I'm not going to go as far as to say that night changed me forever or anything cliche like that, but I will say one thing. Life before and after you've accepted you're going to die are two very different things. I can still remember that feeling of thinking it was the end for me. It just felt so dissociating. Nothing can replicate that feeling. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still shaken up by how calculated and personal the whole thing was. I had recently moved back to my hometown to help care for my aging mother, who lives about 20 minutes away from me. I found this small duplex that was perfect for my situation, close enough to get to her quickly if needed, but far enough that I still had my own space and independence. My mom has been having some health issues lately. Nothing life-threatening, but she's had a few minor falls around the house, and she's stubborn about accepting help. I'd been trying to convince her to get one of those medical alert systems, but she insists she doesn't need one and that I'm just being overprotective. It's been a constant source of stress for me, especially knowing that she's alone most of the time. On this particular evening, I was just settling in for the night. It was around 9 p.m., and I was on the couch watching TV when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number that I didn't recognize, but since I was still relatively new to the area, I figured it might be important and answered. The woman on the other end identified herself as a nurse at a local emergency room. She said my mother had been brought in about an hour ago after taking a fall and hitting her head. According to her, my mom was conscious but asking for me, and they wanted to know if I could get to the hospital quickly. I was horrified. This was exactly the kind of call I'd been dreading since moving back. I didn't doubt the legitimacy of the call for 1 second. The woman on the other end knew my mother's full name, her address, and even mentioned her recent hip replacement surgery from a few months ago. I immediately stopped what I was doing, trying to keep calm and level myself by saying a silent prayer. I didn't even think about locking up the house. I just grabbed my keys, pulled the front door shut behind me, and raced to my car. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare. I kept running through scenarios in my head, and only a few of them were remotely good. When I got to the ER, I rushed up to the reception desk and told them I was there for my mother. I gave them her name and said I'd received a call about her fall. The nurse looked confused and checked her computer, then told me there was no record of anyone by that name being admitted or treated that evening. I insisted there had to be some mistake, since I had just gotten a call from someone claiming to be a nurse there. The receptionist was sympathetic but firm. They had no record of my mother being brought in, and they suggested I try calling her directly to make sure she was okay. So that's what I did. I stepped outside and called my mom's landline, and she answered. She said she'd been sleeping and wanted to know why I was calling so late. I didn't want to scare her, so I just said I was checking up on her and told her to go back to bed. And that's when the heart-sinking realization hit me. This had been a setup. Someone had deliberately given me false information to get me out of my house. I jumped back in my car, furious that I'd been tricked so easily. When I pulled into my driveway, the front door was still closed just like I'd left it. For a moment, I thought maybe I was being paranoid and nothing had happened, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew I'd been robbed. The house had been completely ransacked. My TV was gone, along with my laptop and small jewelry collection I kept in my bedroom. But as I looked around more carefully, I realized the thieves had taken some really strange things too. Family photos had been removed from their frames. Not the frames themselves, just the actual photos. My prescription bottles from the bathroom medicine cabinet had been emptied and taken. It was insane. They had taken things that had relatively little monetary value, yet huge sentimental value to me. It was sadistic, I'm telling you. There's no reason a thief would ever take family photos. There just isn't. I called the police immediately, but I was already feeling defeated at that point. Deep down, I knew the thieves were long gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. I told the police everything. I remembered the phone call verbatim, and after hearing it, the police reached the same conclusion I had. Whoever had been on the other end had known things about my mother and I that no stranger could possibly know. For the life of me, I couldn't even come up with a list of people who would have that information, or even ways that someone could have gotten that information in the first place. The officers told me to feel free to call back whenever I had something concrete. Then they left. I was utterly baffled. Just imagine how unsettled you'd feel if some stranger knew enough about you to lure you out of your house. The theft itself was bad enough, but the fact that they targeted family photos and medical information suggested it wasn't just about quick cash. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning something longer term, possibly identity theft or some other scheme that required personal documentation. But over the next few weeks, nothing else happened. Even though my mother, quote, can't remember who she might have talked to about her personal info, I'm pretty confident that she's the source of the leak. She surprisingly has a lot of friends for a woman her age, and knowing her, she probably said too much to the wrong person. I've warned my mother about that very thing, and she's finally agreed to be more careful about who she gives personal information to, but I can't shake the feeling that we're still being watched by someone who knows way too much about our lives, and isn't finished with whatever they're planning. Either way, I recently got a Ring camera, so hopefully that's enough of a deterrent. If anything else happens, I'll send an update. I'm a single guy in my early 30s, and I've been living alone in this rented house for over a year now. It's a nice little place in a quiet neighborhood, Nothing fancy, but it's comfortable and the rent is reasonable. I've gotten into a good routine here and really feel like I'd made it my home. The incident happened on a Thursday night around 11:30. I was getting ready for bed when I heard aggressive pounding on my front door. Not knocking, but actual pounding, like someone was trying to break it down. I looked out the window, but couldn't see much because of how poorly the porch light is positioned. Despite not being able to see who it was and the aggressiveness of the knocking, I'm a pretty buff guy, so I wasn't scared or anything, more so irritated and confused. I opened the front door, careful to keep the screen door shut as an added layer of protection. I'm not sure what I was expecting to see, but what I did see was surprising to say the least. There was this extremely agitated man standing there. He looked to be maybe a few years older than me. He was average height, had disheveled hair, and was wearing clothes that looked like they had been slept in multiple nights in a row. But what really caught my attention was how angry and unstable he seemed. His eyes were darting around, and he was breathing heavily like he'd been running or was having some kind of panic attack. He was also pacing around, like he couldn't keep his feet on the ground. Before I could even ask what he wanted, he started yelling that this was his house and demanding that I let him in. He said I was trespassing and that he was going to call the police if I didn't get out immediately. I thought he was either on drugs or having some kind of mental health crisis, or maybe a combination of the two. I tried to calm him down and explain that he had the wrong house, but he became even more agitated. That's when he started rattling off details about the house that made me freeze up. I don't even remember everything he said, but he knew several things about the house that you couldn't observe from outside it, details that only someone who had actually lived there would know. Like, for example, he knew that the door for the master bedroom is poorly designed and bangs into the toilet. He knew that the back door sticks and you have to lift it slightly while turning the doorknob. There was some other stuff too, but I really can't remember it all. I don't think I even said anything while he was talking. I was just standing there in shock, but that was only the beginning. It was about to get much, much weirder. Through the screen door, he pulled out a folder and started showing me documentation. He had what appeared to be a lease agreement with his name on it, dated from about 6 months before I'd moved in. He had pieces of mail addressed to him at this address. Everything looked official, though I suspected it had been forged somehow. But the most unsettling part was when he pulled out his phone and started showing me photos. They were literal pictures of him inside my house, sitting on my current couch watching TV, cooking in the kitchen, even lying down in what was now my bedroom. The photos looked recent and completely legitimate. They weren't obviously photoshopped or staged, and most of them weren't solo. They had other people in them, all of whom I'd never seen before. He showed me one photo that he claimed was from this past 4th of July, just a few months ago. It was a selfie taken by a woman I didn't recognize. In it, the woman, him, and a few other people were facing the camera and smiling at the kitchen table. There was a box of fireworks off to the side, and the detail and context of the picture made it look completely authentic. That's when I genuinely started questioning my own memory and sanity. How could this person have all this evidence if they never lived here? I started wondering if I somehow blocked out memories of sharing the house with someone, and if I was the one having some kind of psychological breakdown. It was freaky, especially since I knew for a fact that I had been home on the 4th of July, so the pictures made even less sense. The whole situation was so surreal that I told them I was going to call the police to sort everything out. Not even in an antagonistic way, I just didn't know what else to do. I figured they could check the records and determine what was going on. But the moment I mentioned calling the cops, the guy's demeanor changed completely. He suddenly became very calm and said he'd wait outside while I made the call. Then he just walked away from the door and disappeared into the darkness. I watched from the window, but I couldn't see where he went. When the police arrived about 10 minutes later, I explained the whole bizarre situation. They told me I should try reaching out to my landlord to get in contact with the previous tenants, and that I might get some answers that way. I had all the required documentation proving I was renting this house, but when I offered to show it to them, they waved it off. They said whoever had been on my doorstep was probably just going through a mental episode, and as long as they were gone, I should just carry on with my life. Then they left. I wasn't just going to sit there and be satisfied with that, though. Whether or not that guy had left still left the question of how in the world he had all that evidence. With my landlord's help, I was eventually able to get in contact with the previous tenants. I should mention that my landlord had no idea what had happened either, and said he didn't know anyone matching that guy's description and had never rented to anyone like that. But anyway, the old tenants also had no idea who I was talking about. They said they'd never lived with anyone matching his description, and they'd lived in the house alone for 3 years before moving out. They were just as confused as I was about how this stranger could have such detailed knowledge of the house and apparently legitimate photos of himself inside of it. For the next 2 weeks, I was constantly on edge, but nothing happened, and I started to think that maybe it had just been some elaborate scam that had failed. But of course, that turned out to be mostly wishful thinking. One night, I came home from a night on the town with my friends to find my house completely ransacked. It wasn't like a typical burglary where someone grabs obvious valuables and runs. The place was completely turned upside down, like someone had been looking for something specific. What that thing was, I had no idea. The craziest part is that most of my electronics and other valuable items were still there, despite the fact that the rooms they were in were completely trashed. The police found no signs of forced entry, which suggested that whoever did it had a copy of my key. Given the timing and connection to the strange incident 2 weeks earlier, it seemed obvious that the same person was responsible. The police took things more seriously after that, and so did my landlord. He replaced all the locks in the house immediately and free of charge, and also installed additional security measures. The going theory, and the one I believe, is that some crazy person really does believe he lives in my house and broke in to look for his personal belongings or something. And okay, sure, that's problematic enough on its own, but that does absolutely nothing to explain how he had all that documentation, let alone literal copies of my house key. I wish I had the sense to take a closer look at that so-called lease agreement he had shown me, because I might have been able to get his name. But in the moment, I just wasn't thinking clearly. The documents don't even bother me that much. All that stuff could have been easily forged or altered, including the alleged pieces of mail. What freaks me out to my core, though, are the pictures. I have no explanation for any of that stuff. It's possible they're really old pictures whose dates are doctored, but even if that's the case, it still doesn't explain how my landlord, who's owned that house his entire life, didn't recognize him. One of my friends suggested that I'm up against something not fully natural. I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but I will say that I've had this constant creepy feeling hanging over me whenever I'm in my own home, which is most of the time. I can't even begin to rationalize the whole thing. I just hope that's the end of it. My girlfriend and I recently moved into our new house. It's honestly the home we've been dreaming of, the perfect fit for us. We have a cat named Bella whom we rescued together, so everything felt perfect when we first moved in. The only downside at first was the house to our right. It looked abandoned, as the owner had started renovating it but never finished. The layout of the houses is such that on our right there's a space for the entrance to our back garden, and next to that is the abandoned house's entrance to its back garden. There's no fence separating the two, as the owner removed it to install a new one but never completed the job, leaving both back gardens with open access. Behind the abandoned house is another property separated by a fence. From what we could see, several young men lived there. Occasionally, when we returned home, we'd see them cutting through the neighbor's back garden to reach the front of the street. We didn't think much of it at first. Maybe they knew the owner and had permission. Fast forward to our first night in the new house. We were sitting in the back garden enjoying the space and looked up at the houses behind us, just out of curiosity. That's when we noticed a man staring blankly at us from a window. He wasn't hiding it, he made it very obvious. There was no expression on his face, and the room was dark, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. We assumed he was just curious about his new neighbors, but after half an hour of that blank stare, we decided to go inside. The next few days were normal. I went to work, and my fiancée continued unpacking. One night, we decided to sit in the garden again. It was dark, but we enjoyed looking at the stars and having deep conversations, until we heard the makeshift wooden board fence being moved. 3 men appeared, standing there, staring at us. "Are you okay?" I asked, knowing they wouldn't leave unless I said something. The youngest looking one, around 29, was holding a big bag, and we had no idea what was inside. He offered us some stolen washing up tablets, which we declined. I made a joke about it because the situation felt so awkward. He smiled and said okay, and then they left. What struck me was how they just let themselves into our garden without saying anything, like as if they had every right to be there. We went back inside, thinking it was a one-off, but it all started getting worse from there. They began helping themselves into our garden more often and acting in ways that were clearly meant to intimidate us. They would get into the next door house by lifting up the fence that separated the back gardens and walking through. I forgot to mention, my girlfriend and I are both 20 years old, so of course the idea that they might be trying to intimidate us as two young women was the first thing that crossed our minds. One day, while I was cleaning the front room, two police officers came around the side of our house and entered the abandoned garden. They lifted up the fence and looked around for a few minutes before leaving without saying anything. I thought it was strange, but continued with my day, assuming maybe the people next door were trouble. A few days later, the police knocked on our door. They explained that the house behind us was now vacant. The men had been kicked out for antisocial behavior, apparently not just towards us, but with other neighbors too. Honestly, we were relieved. Even though they hadn't physically done anything yet, it meant they wouldn't get the chance to escalate things. We continued settling into the house, but one day, while I was in the bath, I heard a loud bang outside. I quickly got dressed and ran to find my girlfriend. I found her recording something from our spare bedroom window, which faces the garden of the now empty house. I asked what was going on, but she shushed me. After a moment, she explained. A man we had never seen before pointed up at our bedroom window, and when she noticed him, he sprinted full speed toward our house. He tried our door handle on the way past, then ran back into the garden, threw the broken fence up, and started banging on all the windows of the empty house. We called the police immediately. They came, watched the video, took a statement, and left. We were shaken. Why would they try our door handle and then break into that house? What was he planning? A few nights later, while we were in bed, we heard whistling. The kind of whistle men use to harass women. It was 2:16 a.m. We listened quietly, and then heard someone tapping on our window. Terrified, we checked the cameras, but for some reason, they didn't record anything. Whoever it was must have left shortly after because the noises stopped. We were too scared to sleep, so the next day, we went to my mom's and stayed the night. When we returned the following morning, we noticed our Ring doorbell had been removed and placed on the floor. The SD card was gone. Someone had clearly come back, and we knew who it was. Who else would do that? We called the police again, and they told us to keep all the doors and windows locked. The woman on the phone even said that the removal of the camera could be a sign that they were planning something, which terrified us even more. But at least she was honest. The whistling, banging, and attempts to re-enter the house continued for weeks. We made multiple police reports. They never tried our door again, so we hoped it was over. But 3 weeks later, while in bed watching funny clips from our camera, we checked the live feed. That's when we saw a man outside, wearing a black mask covering his mouth and nose, with his hood up, standing in front of our garden with his arms spread wide, like he was imitating Jesus on the cross. He stared up at our bedroom window with his head tilted. We froze. At the time, we had moved the camera inside the house, so it didn't record. We were so shaken we didn't even think to screen record. He then spoke, but we couldn't hear what he said. Then he turned around, walked to the opposite side of the street, and just stood there, staring at our house for about 30 minutes. We called the police again. They said it wasn't illegal to stare at someone's property and dismissed the whole thing, even when we told them what he did on our lawn. They made us feel like we were overreacting. We couldn't sleep for days. Any noise outside terrified us, even normal ones. Then, one night at 2:52 a.m., we got a notification. I woke my girlfriend and said, "Someone's outside, I know it. Please check the camera." She did, and there they were. 2 masked men coming from the side of our house, shining flashlights into our windows. One of them, the same man who had been harassing us, was holding what looked like a crowbar. Why us? What was the point of this? For days on end, he would stand across the street, pointing, waving, or shouting things up at our window, Every time we looked, he would stare blankly at us. It was clearly meant to scare us, and it worked. We kept contacting the police, but they've done very little. The harassment continues. We've got cameras now, and we record everything, but we feel powerless. Just earlier today, he stood outside again, staring up at us. We got it on video, and we're absolutely terrified, but we'll update if anything else happens. Let me preface this by saying I'm not crazy. I know how this is going to sound, paranoid, unhinged, delusional, but I swear everything I'm about to tell you actually happened. It started with a face, or more accurately, faces that all looked just slightly off. 3 months ago, I ended a relationship with my ex Caleb. We'd been together almost 2 years, and the breakup was long overdue. Caleb wasn't violent or anything, he never hit me, but he was controlling and possessive in that low-key and calculating kind of way. Perhaps the worst kind of way. He'd do things like track when I'm on my phone and quiz me on things I'd done that day to see if I'd give the same answer twice. After I left him, I changed my number, disabled my social media, and even moved apartments. I thought I was in the clear. Then came the barista. It was a Tuesday morning. I stopped by this little hole-in-the-wall coffee shop near my new place. I'd only been there once or twice. As I stepped up to the counter, the barista, a girl about my age, smiled at me, but something about her expression made me pause. She tilted her head and said, "Good morning, sunshine." I froze because that was Caleb's nickname for me. It was not a common one. He used to say it sarcastically whenever I was upset, like, "What's wrong, sunshine?" He enjoyed pushing buttons. I brushed it off, maybe it was a coincidence, but then it happened again. A few days later, I took a rideshare to work. A different driver than usual, older guy, maybe in his 50s. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror like he was trying to recognize me, and then he asked me if I ever figured out what I was running from. He said it as casual as could be. I simply responded, "What?" And he just chuckled and shook his head, like I was in on some joke. Caleb said that to me once. After I told him I needed time to figure myself out, he leaned in, dead serious, and asked, "Ever figure out what you're running from?" Now, 2 strangers have repeated things he said, word for word. It kept happening. A woman at the grocery store bumped into me and whispered, "You don't get to just disappear." A guy on the street said, "Still wearing your hair like that," as he passed. Another one, someone who worked in my building, said, "You always liked this song," while humming the exact tune Caleb used to play when we argued. It wasn't their faces that freaked me out, it was the way they looked at me. Like they knew me, or at least thought they did. They all had different faces, but their eyes all had the same expressions. I started thinking I was going crazy. I mean, what else could explain it? So I did something I wasn't proud of. I contacted Caleb. Not directly. I sent a message to his sister. I told her to tell him to stop. I figured maybe he hired a private investigator. Maybe he was stalking me or pulling strings, telling people things about me. I just wanted it to stop. She texted back the next day, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about. Caleb's in rehab. He's been there for 6 weeks with no phone." I didn't believe her. I thought she was covering for him. That is, until I saw a picture she posted of him on Facebook a week later, looking pale and sunken in, holding one of those one-day sober chips. So it couldn't be Caleb, or at least not directly. I couldn't shake the feeling that these strangers knew things they shouldn't, though. One night, I stayed late at work. I didn't want to go home because my apartment didn't feel safe anymore. Not that anything bad happened inside of it, I just didn't like being alone. Around 10 p.m., I finally called it a night. I walked the 10 minutes to my place, keeping my head down, headphones in, but no music playing. Something I learned to do so I could still hear if someone was following me. When I turned the corner onto my block, I saw someone sitting on the stoop of the building across from mine. A young man with his hoodie up but his head down. I almost ignored him until he spoke. He said, "Cold out tonight, huh, sunshine?" I stopped walking. He didn't look at me, he just stared at the sidewalk like he was reading something on it. I slowly walked past and didn't say a word. When I reached my building, I went upstairs and locked every bolt on the door. I sat on the couch for hours, just listening to nothing. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to find my doormat flipped over. That might not sound like a big deal, but I live alone, and the door to my unit is on the top floor. You don't just accidentally walk by my place. The underside of my mat had something scribbled in pen. It said, "You can change your face too if you want, but I'll still recognize you." I didn't know what it meant, but I still threw up. That day, I booked a hotel for the weekend. I left my apartment without packing anything. I didn't feel safe even grabbing clothes. I just needed to be somewhere crowded. The hotel clerk gave me a room on the 4th floor. It was small, quiet, and kind of stuffy, but it felt safe. But only until around 2 a.m., when someone knocked on my door. There were 3 slow knocks. I sat up in bed and waited. They knocked again eventually. I peeked through the peephole, and it was a woman, maybe in her 40s. Her face was totally blank and expressionless. She was just staring straight at the door. She didn't say anything, so I didn't make a sound, and eventually she left. It was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. The next morning, I asked the front desk if someone had come by to my room. They said no one should have been up there, especially that late. All the rooms on my floor were vacant. That's when it clicked. These weren't random people. They were being sent and fed my details. They were given phrases Caleb used. But if it weren't Caleb, who would do it? And why? I thought about Caleb in rehab, about his obsession with control and making sure I was never fully gone. He didn't need to be the one knocking, he just needed to send others to do it. So I started digging, and there was one conversation I remembered from months before the breakup. Caleb talking about a forum he was on, a place where people shared tactics. He made it sound like it was for productivity or self-improvement. I don't remember the name of it. Honestly, I don't think he ever gave me the name. But in retrospect, it sounded like some creepy, cultish roleplay crap, except it's happening to me for real. Someone, probably Caleb, had hired people to say his words and mimic his patterns, so that even if he was out of my life technically, I'd still be constantly reminded of him. It wasn't stalking in the traditional sense. It was psychological graffiti. Like he was spraying himself onto strangers so I could never be sure who I was looking at. I don't think it's about watching me, but rather about making sure I never stop watching for him. I moved again and disappeared off social media again. I even dyed my hair. I told friends not to tell anyone where I was. It worked until last week. I was walking home from the bookstore and a woman passed me on the street and said, "Still hiding behind books, sunshine?" She didn't stop walking even just to look at me. I don't think this will ever stop. Maybe he paid some crazy underground service to do this to me for a year, who knows? Maybe he made it public. Maybe this is some sick underground game now. Who can scare Sunshine the best? Who can get the closest without touching? I can't trust anyone's face anymore. The constant paranoia is truly eating away at my mental health. My family is a group of homebodies that don't travel, so everyone was surprised when my aunt proposed a trip to one of Michigan's Great Lakes. We agreed, wanting to create new memories together. My cousin booked a spacious Airbnb that could somehow accommodate all 18 of us, which felt like a miracle considering the price. The house sat right on the beach, with gorgeous lake views that stretched for miles, almost like an ocean. Most of us claimed rooms in the main house, but because of our large group, some of us were placed in a second building directly behind it, a 2-story garage with bedrooms upstairs. My 3 cousins and I were assigned to sleep there. At first, we didn't think much of it. We spent most of the first day enjoying the hot tub, relaxing on the beach, and soaking in the scenery. It wasn't until night that we entered the garage for real. The space was outdated and neglected, with carpeted bathrooms that smelled like mold, stained bed linens, and a poorly secured latch on the door. Clearly, the cleaners focused on the main home and ignored the garage. My cousins were grossed out and refused to sleep on the beds unless we washed the sheets, so I suggested we do laundry. The machines were small, so we could only do 1 set of bed sheets at a time, and it was obvious we'd be up late. We passed time upstairs, waiting for the first load. My cousin Maria complained about how we got stuck with the worst place, and as she spoke, I started to feel uneasy, like something bad was coming. I've had this feeling before, a rare kind of intuition that usually ends in a nightmare or something worse. I told my cousins to stay alert, and they listened. especially since we'd all experienced a break-in before when we lived in Detroit. Around midnight, the bell rang from the first floor, signaling the wash was done. I went downstairs alone, swapped the load into the dryer, and brought up the clean-smelling sheets. When my cousins saw how clean they were, they wanted their bedding washed too, so I kept going up and down between cycles doing everyone's sheets. At around 2:37 a.m., we were finally done. We made the beds and were too tired to stay up any longer. My cousin Nikki insisted we leave the light on, and while they all fell asleep quickly, I stayed up doing some schoolwork on my phone. I'm a light sleeper, something that stuck with me since the break-in, and I remained hyper-aware of my surroundings even while half asleep. Then, around 3 a.m., a loud bang hit the garage door, like someone had thrown their body against it. I sat up, startled, but my cousins didn't move. I tried telling myself it was just wind, though the noise was too heavy for that. Still, I stayed quiet and tried to sleep. But then it happened again, same deafening crash, this time shaking the garage door. The building trembled from the impact. I was fully awake now, watching the lamp-lit room as my cousins continued to sleep. No animal or gust of wind could cause that. 20 minutes later, the third boom hit. The garage shook again, and finally, 2 of my cousins bolted upright. I asked if they heard that, already knowing the answer. Nikki asked what that was, and I said I don't know, but this is the 3rd time I'm hearing it. We all agreed no wind could cause that sound. Nikki suggested texting her mom, my aunt, so we did. It was 4:11 a.m. when she responded, realizing something serious must be going on. She woke my uncle, who ran outside to check the property. We stayed upstairs, too afraid to move, until we heard knocking. It was my uncle at the door, and when we opened it, we saw him standing there with my dad and a few of our older male cousins. That's when I knew it was serious. There was no wind, no one playing around. My uncle told us to grab our things that were going to the main house. Then he said there was someone on the property, and that's what made my heart sink. I threw everything into my suitcase, and we all rushed out of the garage. Once inside the main house, most of the family woke up from the noise and commotion. We sat in the living room, trying to piece it all together. I told them about the first 2 loud crashes, and my cousins confirmed the third. My aunt explained that when my uncle went out to investigate, she followed him. He shouted "hey" at someone standing behind the garage. The door to the main house slammed behind her right then, and there was no wind to explain it. She feared someone might have slipped into the house, so she ran to wake my dad and cousins. After searching, no one else was found inside. Then my uncle described what he saw. A man stood behind the garage, not hiding or moving, but staring like he wanted to be seen. When my uncle called out, the man didn't flinch. He simply walked away and vanished, not into the darkness, but into thin air. The leaves on the ground didn't crunch, and there were no footsteps left behind. My uncle's not someone who makes up stories either. He's a serious, logical man, which made everything scarier. My brothers added that they found 2 jester cards, one in the main house and one in the garage. The one in the garage was twisted and demonic looking. One cousin pointed out that jesters symbolize mockery, and the loud sounds happened around 3 a.m., the so-called devil's hour. It was as if we were being taunted. My uncle had even checked for footprints, but saw only his and my cousin's, not the man's. Another cousin drove down the road during the incident to try and spot someone fleeing, but found no one. That day, no one returned to the garage. We squeezed into the main house, on floors, couches, anywhere there was room. My mom gave up her bed so we could sleep more comfortably. On the second night, she slept on a couch by the large windows and woke around 4 a.m. to footsteps on the porch. She didn't dare open her eyes. She was afraid of seeing someone looking in. Then she heard someone trying the basement door. It had a weak lock, and my brothers and male cousins were sleeping down there. The door rattled as someone tried to break in. My mom rushed to the basement, but by the time she reached the beachside entrance, no one was there, and all the boys were still fast asleep. That was our last night. Though we planned to stay until Tuesday, we left Monday instead. On the way home, we couldn't stop talking about what had happened. When my mom found out I had been going downstairs alone during laundry, she theorized that someone might have been watching me and thought I was alone in the garage. The time between my last trip downstairs and us going to sleep lined up way too well with the banging sounds. Theories started to form. Some of us thought it was a neighbor trying to scare us off. Others believed there was something paranormal, especially because of the jester cards. My aunt pointed out that a normal person would have run when my uncle spotted them, but this man didn't run. He just watched and disappeared. We contacted the Airbnb host, who claimed she'd review the footage from the camera above the garage door, but we never heard back. It made us wonder, did she know the man? Was he a neighbor? When we first arrived, my sister and cousin had walked the beach and passed a woman next door. She watched them coldly, without friendliness or a greeting, just an unfriendly gaze. The house was in the middle of nowhere, and we understood how constant Airbnb guests might annoy locals, but we were respectful. We didn't deserve what happened. This was our first family trip, and hopefully not our last, even after everything we went through.